Story 1. The man who wasn't supposed to be there. About a year ago, my wife and I were getting home from a nice dinner out one evening when we noticed something strange. Our front door was wide open. It was a warm summer evening, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the yard. I immediately told my wife to stay outside while I ran in. My heart started racing. I sprinted up to our bedroom to grab the shotgun and load it. I quickly checked the upstairs rooms, scanning every corner for any signs of someone being there. There was nothing, no one. I moved downstairs, the shotgun gripped tightly in my hand, checking every room, living room, kitchen, dining room, and then headed down into the basement. Again, I found no signs of anyone. There was no mess, nothing moved. Everything seemed normal, except for the door being wide open. I started to feel a strange unease settle over me, like something wasn't right. I called the cops and told them what happened. They arrived shortly after and began investigating, starting with the upstairs rooms and working their way down to the basement. The police seemed just as puzzled as I was. They questioned us about whether we were sure the door had been properly shut when we left. At first, I had doubts, thinking maybe I had forgotten to lock it. But my wife was absolutely certain that we had locked the door when we left. The police didn't find anything either. They were convinced if someone had broken in, they hadn't stuck around long, given that there were no signs of a burglary. The place seemed completely undisturbed. My wife was clearly rattled, though, and she was crying, saying she wasn't comfortable being in the house anymore. I tried my best to comfort her, telling her that whoever broke in must have just gotten scared and left in a hurry. I didn't think they'd come back. Eventually, we managed to calm her down a bit, and we went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept tossing and turning, unable to sleep. I kept replaying the events over and over in my mind, and after a few hours of restlessness, I finally drifted off into a light sleep. But suddenly, in the dead of night, my sleep was shattered by the terrifying scream of my wife. I bolted upright, my heart racing. I looked over at her, and she was staring at the closet, her face pale with fear. For a moment, I had no idea what was going on. But then it hit me, I had forgotten to check the second closet, the one in our bedroom. I turned to look, and through the slight gap in the door, I saw it, a man's face, just barely visible. He was poking his head out from the closet, looking right at us. Before I could even process what I was seeing, the man quickly shut the door, as if he knew I had spotted him. Instinctively, I reached for the shotgun beside the bed, my hands shaking but steady. I cocked the gun and screamed at him to come out. The closet door creaked open again, and for a split second, I saw him standing there before he bolted for the front door. He wasn't going to surrender. He wasn't scared. He just wanted to get out of there, fast. I could have shot him. The man was just inches away from me, and I had the gun aimed directly at him. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was hesitation, but I just couldn't pull the trigger. I watched in a blur as he ran out the front door and disappeared into the night. He was never caught. The police never found him. And despite the fact that I know I had the upper hand, I couldn't help but feel like I failed. The man had gotten away scot-free. We never found out who he was or why he chose our home. But I'll never forget that moment. The only thing that comforts me is knowing that having that gun there, by my side, kept me calm enough to make the right decisions. That's the only reason I can say we're both still here today.
Story 2. Grandma's House of Secrets. Back when my grandma was still alive, I would walk down the block to her house every day to help with various chores. She was a very paranoid woman, always locking up her house and keeping everything secure. One day, I walked over at my usual time, expecting to find the door locked as always, but to my surprise, the front door was wide open. I stood there for a moment, confused, staring at the door as the unsettling feeling crept over me. This wasn't like her at all. I hesitated, calling out her name as I stepped inside, but the house was eerily silent. There was no sign of her anywhere. As I moved through the foyer, I noticed something even stranger. Her bedroom door upstairs was slightly ajar, and I could hear the distinct sound of drawers opening and closing, followed by the clatter of objects being moved around.
I called out again, louder this time, but the only answer I received was the sound of her rummaging through something in the room. I couldn't understand why she wouldn't respond. I slowly ascended the stairs, the creaking of the old wood beneath my feet breaking the silence. As I got closer to the bedroom, the noises grew more frantic, almost as if she was hurriedly searching for something, pulling items out of drawers, slamming them shut.
I was almost to the door when it slammed shut with a violent crash. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. I knocked softly, calling her name, but there was no response, not even the sound of her shuffling about. The room had fallen completely silent. That's when my phone rang, and I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. It was my grandma's number on the caller ID. I answered it quickly, trying to mask my growing unease, but as soon as I heard her voice, a chill ran down my spine. She sounded calm. "Don't come over today," she said, her voice unnervingly flat. "I'm on my way to the seniors club." Something didn't feel right. The voice on the other end didn't sound like her, not her usual warm, slightly cracked tone. I felt an icy chill run down my spine as I realized I had just spoken to someone else, someone who had been in my grandma's house, hiding upstairs. I played it cool and said, "Grandma, I'll be downstairs," before quickly heading to the kitchen, grabbing a knife, and dialing 911. I stayed as silent as I could, listening for any sounds coming from upstairs, my pulse racing. I wasn't sure if the intruder knew I was there, but I was ready. The police arrived soon after, rushing into the house, and within moments, I heard the loud bang of a gunshot. My heart pounded in my chest, not knowing what was happening upstairs. When the paramedics arrived, they wheeled out the man, and I recognized his face immediately. It was my grandma's next-door neighbor. Apparently, he had noticed that my grandma had left the house and decided to break in. He was looking for valuables, but instead of stealing anything, he had hidden in her bedroom, waiting for the right moment to strike. The police discovered him hiding next to the bedroom door, a large knife in hand, ready to attack. If I had walked into that room just a few moments earlier, I would have walked right into his trap. It was the most terrifying realization of my life, knowing that I had narrowly escaped what could have been a deadly encounter.
Story 3. Something watched me sleep. When I was 25, which was about 3 years ago, I went to visit my parents in the Poconos. I hadn't stayed there in a long time, but my parents always kept my old room exactly the way it was. They took care of it even though I had moved out years ago. It was like nothing had changed. The same old furniture, the same pictures on the walls, the same smell of my childhood still lingering in the air. It was comforting, yet unsettling in a way. That night, I was looking forward to a good night's rest in my old room, but things quickly turned strange. It started when I was lying in bed, wide awake, just thinking about life. The house was silent except for the occasional creaks of the old wood and the wind howling outside. I could hear the faint rustling of leaves in the trees, but it was peaceful. At least, that's what I thought. Suddenly, I heard a faint creaking sound, almost like a door opening. My heart skipped a beat as I turned toward my closet. The door, which had been firmly closed when I had climbed into bed, was slightly ajar. I blinked, confused. I was certain I had shut it before lying down. Maybe I had been too tired and hadn't latched it properly. I shrugged it off, but an annoying feeling lingered in the pit of my stomach. I sat up and got out of bed, walking over to the closet. As I approached, the door creaked again, as though it were opening by itself. I hesitated for a moment, but then pushed it open fully. Nothing was inside. Just the usual assortment of old clothes and random things I'd forgotten about over the years. Still, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that something wasn't quite right. I closed the door tightly and climbed back into bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me. A few hours passed and I finally began to drift off. That's when I heard it again, this time louder. The same faint creaking sound, but it wasn't just coming from the closet. It was coming from above. The ceiling above me was rattling, like something was moving around in the attic or inside the walls. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My first thought was that maybe a squirrel or some animal had gotten into the attic, but the sound was different. It sounded intentional, like something or someone was up there. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to block out the noise, but it didn't stop. It was like whatever was up there was deliberately making noise, almost like it was trying to get my attention. After what felt like hours, the sound finally stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, but when I lay there in the dark, my mind kept returning to the sounds I had heard. It didn't make sense. The next morning, I casually mentioned the sounds to my dad. He shrugged it off, saying it was probably just some old house noises. But when I told him about the closet door being open, he didn't seem so sure. He checked the latch, pulled on the door, and assured me that everything was fine. He suggested maybe I had just forgotten to latch it properly the night before. Still, I wasn't convinced. That night, I stayed up, waiting. I had to know what was happening. Sure enough, right on cue, the closet door creaked open again. This time, I didn't just ignore it. I got up and checked the whole room. I went over every inch of the room, looking for anything that might explain what was going on. But there was nothing. Just the same old room I had left behind years ago. The rattling in the ceiling started again, louder this time. I stared up at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise, but just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I sat in the silence, trying to calm my racing thoughts. And then something happened that made my blood run cold. I looked up at the ceiling vent, and I saw them. Two wide-open eyes staring at me through the slats of the vent. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but no, they were real. I could see the pupils, the way they seemed to move, almost as if they were watching me, waiting for me to notice them. My body went numb. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty house. My parents rushed into the room, asking what was wrong. I pointed up at the vent, but by the time they got there, the eyes were gone. My parents stood there, looking at me like I had completely lost it. They dismissed it as a bad dream or just my imagination running wild, but I knew what I had seen. There was no way I could have imagined it. I don't know what those eyes were, what caused them to appear that night, but I can't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the ceiling. The closet door creaked open again in the following nights, and I heard the rattling sounds above me. But the eyes never came back. I couldn't tell anyone about it. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. But I'll never forget what I saw that night. It was too real. And it haunts me still,